will go into the Merchantman as well.
Let's go back to what you said about hover mode.
Yep.
It might be a source. It might be a source, but I don't know how you feel about it.
It's getting triggered.
I tend to look at it. We were talking about this a little bit before we started the show. I tend to look at it as a huge win for the community, because while the work on hover mode isn't in the game right now, what it accomplished was it proved the entire concept of the shared development experience with Star Citizen. We were able to develop a thing, put it out into testing in an alpha state and not in the finished game state.
Yeah.
So, get the feedback, find out what we didn't know, which is always a part of game development, and then iterate and improve on that from there. Change course where necessary. Can take the parts that did work that we did like and move them forward with something like proximity assist. I think overall it was a tremendous victory, an example of what works about the Star Citizen process.
Part of all of game development is like learning what the game is as you're kind of getting closer and closer to the vision that you have in your head.
Now, you think you know what I'm about to say at the beginning of the episode. You probably think you know what I'm about to say, specifically using that clip where they're talking about hover mode. But you're wrong. We're not going to dwell on that. Everyone who's probably watching this channel knows my history with hover mode, knows what I said about hover mode before it came out, and yeah. What I'm going to say is this is one of the reasons why I'm a Star Citizen backer. This is one of the reasons why I'm here, because they implemented it. There were concerns. They implemented it anyway. They wanted to see it. They saw it. It didn't work. And they fixed it. And I won't say fixed it, but they pulled back on a lot of the things that they made some pretty bold statements in the beginning about it. This is how it's going to go. And they realized, no, it doesn't work. So hats off to CIG for doing that. Now, we can argue about the finer points, of course, but they obviously they had to walk that path, and they had to figure it out for themselves, and they did, and they to a certain extent reverted some of the changes. Now we can make an episode and we can talk about the flight model, docking, and all that thing later. And certainly they did go into docking a little bit more later in the episode, but that's not really why we're here. But I wanted to emphasize that clip not for, any other reason than to say that this is why I'm a backer. I play other games, and I have seen situations where developers, when faced with undeniable fact, when faced with truth, ironclad, unassailable arguments that this thing that you're doing does not work, that they will just pathologically deny that truth, and they will sit there and they will, just create so much animosity with their game communities over the most ridiculous things, because they can't ever just say, you know what, the way we did it in the past was actually the better way, and we should just revert to that system. And you know what? To see CIG just come right out and say this and say, yeah, it didn't work, and we're going to go back. We're going to explore some different things, but we're going to take it back a notch or two to something that works a lot better. It's one of the reasons why I continue to be here.
Right. Do you plan to add aim assistance to turrets? Aim assist.
They do actually have a small amount of aim assist at the moment, but it's not enough or sort of appropriate for what we're doing. So we want to add gimbal assist to turrets, which will help sort of smooth out the turrets. Are one of the tricky things to do because the ships are moving so quickly. So one of the other things Vehicle Experience is doing is trying to bring those combat ranges in at the moment. So that was one of the goals with the new flight model, was to sort of bring it in, and we've been slowly working over the last year to try and do that. We're aware people aren't fighting as close as we want them to, which in turn makes turrets worse, because you can't see what you're trying to shoot at. Yeah.
Now, aim assist for turrets. Aim assist is something that I'm still a little bit leery of putting in the game, the auto gimbal type idea. I'm not fully comfortable with how it works right now. I think it's a little bit too easy. But when it comes to turrets, I'm a little bit more understanding of it there rather than on the ship itself. I feel that when you're in a turret, you're also having to compensate not just for the motion of your target, but for the motion of the platform to which you're attached, which is the ship, which adds an extra degree of difficulty. So for me, I like this. I like what they're talking about. I feel that there's with that added degree of difficulty, I think that it is a much more understandable thing to have on the turrets of a ship rather than on the pilot operated weapons on the ship itself. That is something that I'm glad to hear. I think that making it work a little bit better will make turret gameplay a little less frustrating and a little bit more interesting. And so, it's a very good update to hear this, because there are so many ships that have turrets, from the biggest Javelin all the way down to the Cutlass and technically the Super Hornet. I'm very glad to hear this. This is something that I would have actually rather seen on turrets rather than ships, but I'm glad to hear that they're doing it. I really, really am. Now, to what degree is also, it's a balancing question. It's going to be a give or take thing, and we're going to see different iterations of it, obviously, going into the future. You don't want turreted ships to basically almost be like a porcupine. Like, you can't approach it from any of these angles, only that angle, that sort of thing. We'll see. We'll see where it falls in. But I'm very hopeful with this feature that it is going to go in a direction that we can all appreciate without it becoming overpowered.
Let's see. Is it still allowed to allow players to paint their ships? Or still allowed? I guess it's still planned to allow players to
still
paint their
planned. The extent of it, we're still sort of going backwards and forwards on. We actually had some discussions this week on it. Obviously, with the Origin Customizer, we provided preset colors for that. That is definitely something we're going to do. How far we let users customize the colors beyond that is still to be determined. But what we do want to definitely do is letting users pick emblems or decals to go on their ships, naming their ships. Obviously, they'll have the serial numbers put on there. And the emblems themselves will be from a pre-selected pool of things. So, trying to think of a good example. The Vanguard on its upper wings has like a 42 decal on it, and it's 42, 42, and it's 42 on the tail fins as well. That would be a generic decal slot. So when you go to a paint shop in game, you would go, I want to change that from the default. I want it to be a big smiley face or star or something, and then apply it to all of those things.
And I can already see it in chat for those of you who remember very early conversations about the potential for uploading emblems or orgs. This is not to say that that's not a possibility. It's just that's not in the design that we're looking at right now. What the future holds, the future will hold. You start with what we can do, with what's internal, with what we can provide you first, and then we examine those possibilities afterwards. So
having a nice pre-selected pool stops what we all know people will do.
Yep.
Solve some problems.
Now, that was something, obviously, that, once again, affects every ship in the game. And it's cool to hear that. It's cool to see them talking about those sorts of features. What I'm hoping for is the ability to change the base paint color of the ship. Obviously Pirate Caterpillar right here, or what is now the Pirate Caterpillar, because the original Pirate Caterpillar was far superior in paint job to what we have now. But I would love to be able to change the base paint colors. I mean, even to use the muted sort of black that is on most of the hull. I would like to spread that to the entire hull and then just keep the red down to a minimum, or change my ship. I think that there's probably a lot of players out there who aren't really looking for, so much of the decal system, though obviously that that would, be nice to have. But I think that there's a lot of players out there who would really like to be able to change the base paint colors of their ship, even if it's to change it to a matte finish from a glossy finish or something like that. I was hoping they were going to go in that direction and talk about that. I hope that is something that is on the table with it, because I think that is probably an area that a lot of players would go to first. They want to change the paint scheme of the ship. Maybe if it doesn't change the interior, fine, but the exterior of the ship, I think that there's a lot of players who would be interested in, that feature. Hopefully we'll hear about that in the future, because if it's just a whole bunch of preset paint schemes and stuff like that, that would actually be something of a bummer. I'm fine with preset decals, and you can only approve what you can approve, and that sort of thing. But hopefully being able to change the base paint colors is something that we're going to get in the future.
When I sped up my re-entry in there, it wasn't like, oh, it's procedural now. Or systemic, rather. So it sounds like there's some prerequisite work that needs to be done for that. The next question is actually about some prerequisite work that has already been done. Several of our ships with hatches, like the Freelancer, Constellation Caterpillar, have hatches built into them already. When ship-to-ship docking is implemented, will these ports be compatible with each other, or are we going to have to see a redesign to a standardized port?
So we do actually have two standards for ports. So we have the circular ones that you see on a lot of ships. Those are 2 meter diameter, so it's big enough for a player to just walk straight through. We don't need to do any. If the docking collars are on side to side, you'll literally just be able to walk through them. So any that are circular will be 2 meters diameter. If they're not, those ones will be changed. I think there's one on the Reclaimer that's like 1.8 or something like that. So things like that will go and change. And then we have the rectangular ones that you see. The best example is the one on the front of the hammerhead in the mouth. It's 4 meters by 2 meters. That's the larger capital ship standardized docking port. So the Idris has them, the Javelin has them, and space stations support both of those. For when we have docking in game, we have these, like you see at an airport, a jet bridge that goes out, and on the end of it is a small round one and a large rectangular one. So any ship.
Now, of course, this is something that we've talked about a lot. I just kind of faded that clip out because they go into a much more long-winded explanation. Now, certainly with ships like the Caterpillar and certainly ships like the Hammerhead and whatnot, the ship geometry and the placement of the docking ports is not ideal. And I think that is probably where we're running into a lot of drag, if you will, on the development of this, because you can't really just come up with one that works for all ships, because the ports are placed in different places and the ships have different geometry. It's certainly something that has held up the Hull C. I mean, the Hull C, for a while we were seeing it, it was like, oh my god, it's almost here, and then it just disappeared and slowly is kind of making its way, hopefully, back into the game. But even that small docking port that you can barely see right there on the Caterpillar, there are some geometric challenges around that. So I guess we're going to have some kind of collar that extends out of those slots that allows it to mate up with different ships, how far it's going to reach, that sort of thing. That is probably what, a lot of their work is right now, is figuring out how to, one, get it out far enough so that the ship's geometry isn't an issue. Certainly with the Hammerhead, you can see how having it withdrawn behind another door inside the front of the Hammerhead is going to be a challenge. So I don't think that it's anything that you can expect to see all that soon. There's a lot of unique ships with these features that need a lot of work. So how this is going to come into the game and when, not exactly sure. As we all know, things can come onto the production pipeline or come onto the roadmap and then disappear. Salvage being the clearest example. So it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of shapes up. It obviously affects a great amount of ships, and it is very important to the game moving forward. But that, those were kind of the major highlights that I took out of that video. On the one hand, you can get kind of depressed about it, because obviously there's a lot of work left to be done on a lot of key issues, and they went into a whole bunch more detail. There's a lot of stuff tied into UI. There's a lot of stuff tied into systems that just aren't fully functional yet or aren't implemented in the game yet. So there's a lot of challenges moving forward. So on the other hand, you know, as we get things, we get time to get used to them before we get to new things. And that's kind of one of the virtues of playing the game right now, is you have the time to kind of assimilate this at a much gentler pace than someone who may have just bought a game package, said, I'll come back when the game is done, who walks into the game and then just goes, I don't know where anything is. I don't know how anything works. What am I going to do? Right? So, you know, bit of a silver lining on something of a big cloud right there, which is there is still so much work to do. But it is slowly but surely being done. Anyways, that's the show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.